Thank you. Lynn, did you turn on your thing?
Yes.
Okay, good. So that means that people in Zoom land will be able to hear you.
Okay.
I met Lynn when she came to give a talk at the Friends of the Arcata Marsh when I just retired, and I kind of fell in love. And if you haven't gone there recently, you should go check out the interpretive garden that's right next to the Interpretive Center of Native Plants. She and Paul have done a wonderful job at renovating it. That was sort of my introduction to Lynn. And then we started, talking about giving a talk, and I think she hadn't built the slideshow, and she got some help doing that. So thank you for being brave and moving into technology. Anyway, please welcome Lynne Abels.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Is my Zoom on? Okay. Everybody in Zoom land and in the room. So the garden historian, Derek Clifford, who's, now it's a little hard to see because it's so dark. Maybe it goes this way. Whoops. There. A garden is man's idealized version of the world, and it follows that fashionable gardens of any period betray the dream world, which is the period's ideal. Gardens are the dreams and aspirations of a culture made visual. And if you look at pictures of gardens from the past or the present, you can see that dream pretty easily. So this is an Italian Renaissance garden, and the design is based on the Greek idea that there's symmetry in all things, and they really emphasize in their design balance, order, and geometry. So a little bit different is this garden, which is a Japanese garden. The word for garden in Japanese is niwa, and that means pure place. This aesthetic values irregularity and asymmetry, and beauty in this aesthetic is found in an intriguing display of the unexpected. So the Japanese garden uses the concept of empty space, or ma, quite consciously. So the empty space is what allows the viewer to enter into a relationship with the garden. And but is this a natural garden? No, but it's their version of it's a carefully curated version of a natural garden to them at that time. So how about this? Is this a natural garden? No. So this entire landscape scene was engineered by the 18th century designer Capability Brown. And what looks like a river there is actually a series of thin lakes that are man-made. And look at the broad expanses of grass. He knocked down the old Renaissance gardens, and he brought that grass right up to the door of people's mansions. And he was so popular in his time with the landed aristocracy that he virtually remade the landscape of England, according to historians. And more than any other style, this style has had an enduring influence on us today. So we won the Revolutionary War with the British, but we did not win the freedom from the law. And if grass was a crop, this would be the biggest crop in America. And in a summer dry climate like California, the lawn is a perfect example of a garden style that is at war with the environment. And when you go to war with the environment, it's going to cost you a lot more money, a lot more time and resources to make it work. So this is a wilder, more contemporary style of planting. But is this a natural garden? No, but it looks more natural to our eyes, I think. This is a river of sages, and this was designed by Peter Adolf, the Dutch designer. He designed the Highline Park in New York City, and he uses grasses, I think, very well in his designs. And he's famous for step planting, meadow, prairie type things, but he does all kinds of landscapes. And this is called a matrix style of planting or a new naturalist style. And you could use native plants in any style of planting, any style of garden. But what I like about this garden is that it can create good habitat for birds and insects. And it's an aesthetic that requires a lot less maintenance. And it's an aesthetic that requires less grooming because it really admires decay and the cycles of life in the garden. So you're not doing so much cleanup all the time. And that's really good for the birds, insects, and wildlife. So when you combine native plants with a matrix approach, I like to call it habitat gardening. And like the Japanese garden, it aims to evoke the essence of a landscape, but in a less controlled, far less controlled way. And it is informed by scientific research, and it emphasizes providing for native insects, birds, and wildlife. So the beauty of the garden doesn't just come from the fact that it's pleasing to the eye, but the fact that you know that it's supporting these other lives. And so this is what I'm going to talk about tonight, is the matrix approach. I've extracted some things that I think are really useful in our area. And there are a couple of books that I find helpful. So this one is Designing California Native Gardens, The Plant Community Approach to Artful Ecological Gardens by Glenn Keetor and Alry Middlebrook. And I've left out California in your handout, but it's in your handout. And Planting in a Post-Wild World, Designing Plant Communities for a Resilient Landscape by Thomas Rayner and Claudia West. So the first principle is, the first principle is plant a community. And a community is a group of plants that go together naturally in the landscape. And so with this approach, you're not thinking, well, these are the native plants I really like, and I'm going to go and get them, and then I'm going to try and fit them into the design. Before you even get to that stage, you're thinking, what kind of a community would do best in my setting? And then you design from that. So I like to work with plants that are from our county in particular. There's a huge planting palette from our county nearby. And if you can at all, try to source the plants from our county as well, because then you get the ecotypes that are particularly adapted to our setting. And that's not so easy to do now, but I'm hoping it will be easier to do in the future. A well-designed community has legibility, and legibility means it reads to the eye as a certain type of landscape and has meaning to the mind. So this is a redwood forest, and that's a community in our area. So could I have a little more light, please? It's hard to see.
The side lights would work.
That would be good.
How about that?
Good.
That's good. So think about some basic landscape types. and like forests, open woodland, riparian areas, and grassland. So this is one way how these landscapes express themselves locally. And this is a redwood forest. Here's a mixed evergreen forest. This is a scene of oak woodland from the Bald Hills. And this plant in the foreground is riverbank lupin, Lupinus rivularis, and that grows at the Marsh Garden, but we didn't plant it. It just volunteered and it fits right in. So we really love it. Here's a view of the Arcata Marsh. You might have wetlands in your garden. And another community I like to represent in a garden is edge habitat, which is the place where one community transitions to another, like a woodland will open up into a meadow. And birders know that edge habitats are very productive. So ask yourself what you have noticed hiking around, and the scenes that have special meaning to you can be a source of inspiration for your garden. Another thing you want to think about is sociability, and that has to do with how a plant spreads and how it competes with other plants. So imagine it's a scale. One is always good to go. It doesn't spread by rhizomes, and it seeds some, but not a whole bunch. So red columbine or Aquilegia formosa would be an example of that type of plant. Oops, back. 2 is the mama bear. It seeds around some, or it spreads by rhizomes, but not too fast and not too much. And in the right conditions, it's controllable, like yarrow or Aquileia millefolium. It is too much if it's too wet or the soil's too rich, then it's going to take over. But if the soil is lean and it's not a moist environment and you're not watering, it gets along fine. So 3 is it spreads by rhizomes. The rhizomes go a long way. It has seeds that can leap tall buildings in a single bound. Never trust a plant that moves faster than you do. So coast aster or Symphytrichum chilens is one of those plants for me. But the idea behind this is that as the plants fill in, you don't have to weed as much. And the main maintenance chore involves refereeing then between the native plants after they get well established. And if the plants are well matched, you don't have to referee as much. So it's reducing your maintenance. Principle 2 is plant in layers and keep the layers distinct. So here's a diagram of the layers from the book Planting in a Post-Wild World. And the first layer is structural or an architectural layer. And that is your woody plants and trees and shrubs and tall grasses in a grassland. And it's really important to include trees or shrubs if you can at all in your garden, because they are great for birds and birds need cover. So in particular shrubs, if you have them, you will notice that there are more birds and more bird activity. So, but you need to get a sense of how tall and how wide that plant is going to be before you plant it in your yard. So you want to get a good estimate of size, and nursery tags aren't that reliable for this because they want to sell the plant. So it's always like really like this big, you know. But I like to go on Google and get like 3 size estimates, different ones. They'll vary quite a bit. And then I take the average, and then you want to go out into the garden and mark it off. And if you hear a voice in your head that says, I'll just prune it for size, really think about that one. So you also want to consider the shape that the plants are going to have because they're mostly green. This layer is mostly green. And the shape and texture is going to play a more important role in your design. And if you overcrowd them, you can lose the shape. And I really like the big rounded shape of a lot of our shrubs. I think they're very beautiful. Large bunch grasses would be a good example of this. Festuca californica or California fescue. It's very architectural, and you can use it as a scrim planting to see the other plants through. But if you put them too close together, the inflorescence jams up with the other ones, and you don't get that beautiful shape that is so desirable. So the next layer, the middle one there, is seasonal interest layer, and that's all the perennials, annuals, and bulbs, and things that bloom at a different time of year. And I like to look at the bloom times to get something blooming from early spring through the fall for pollinator food. And those plants will move around the garden and change over time as they seed around. So the bottom layer, the ground cover layer, is the matrix of low-growing, often rhizomatous plants that the other plants emerge from. And it can also be a ground-hugging shrub like kinnikinnick or Arctocephalus uva ursi. And I really like Arctocephalus genus because it provides those early blooms for the emerging bumblebees. In a woodland setting, I don't like to mix the ground covers too close together. I think it looks muddled. So they are about 2.5 in sociability. And I like to think of them as islands in a drift of islands. And so you have some that are one ground cover, and here's another one, and then that's distinct, and then they blend together. So that's the river part. So the trickiest part about the layers is you want them to read to the eye as separate. So people will say they don't like native plant gardens because they're too messy. And what they usually mean by that is the layers aren't distinct. It's congested. This is where the Japanese concept of empty space is good to remember, because you want the space between about waist and eye level to be mostly open so that people can see through the landscape and interpret it with their eyes. Number 3. This is the easy one. Plant in drifts. Repeat the use of individual species of plants. Doing this will lend cohesiveness to your design. And you can have a single plant of, especially if you have a small yard and you want to have some shrubs, but the other plants, the perennials and things, should be in groups of 3 or more. There's that old adage about planting in uneven numbers, and it looks best to repeat those groupings throughout the landscape. So if you want a modern look, reduce the number of species that you're using, and the design is simpler and it reads as more modern. I don't know if that's important to you, but there you have it. So, whoops, back. This is a garden I did, and my friend Valerie, who helped me out with this computer thing, which I wouldn't have been able to do at all without her help. So this is a river or a stream of blue-eyed grass, and it's actually a dry stream bed that I planted on either side of it with the blue-eyed grass, and that's a nice thing to do. So yes, 4. Balance the wild and cared for elements in your design. And native plant gardens are new to people. There are lawsuits going on with HOAs, homeowners associations, all over the country about native plants. And so you want to give people the idea that this is a cared for garden, and you want to give them cues to care. And one of the simplest ways you can do this is with your garden paths. And I like to mark out the paths at the very beginning, actually in the space, and mark them out as wide as they're actually going to be with flagging. And this automatically gives you a frame for the garden. So it shapes the beds. It gives you a sense of where the garden is going very easily. And then you want to be creative about your choice of path materials. So I like to look at Japanese gardens for their path ideas. They have all kinds of different paths. And what I like about this path is the stepping stones run off center of the bed materials. So I think that's an interesting play of asymmetry. And an elongated S pattern. This is a slight S, but an S shape is very pleasing to the eye. And when you go around the bend of that S, it can create a sense of mystery. The other thing you want to do is create stopping places in the garden. So these can be places that are physical stopping places, like you could have some seating, say, around a water feature. And it's really important to include water in some form in your design because birds really need that water in our summer dry climate. Another kind of stopping place can be visual. And this is a little broken bird bath I had that I filled with sedum spatulifolium or Pacific stonecrop. So you can also do, there's a number of things you can do for a stopping place. You can do a private place where you can watch birds, a small bench, you can do a shrine, you can do garden art. But it's important to include that into the garden so you welcome people in. So the fifth principle is that you want to create a strategy for weed control at the very beginning, before you even make the garden. So this is a low maintenance style, but it is not a no maintenance style. There's no such thing as a no maintenance garden. So you want to figure out as part of your strategy what you're going to do about watering, mulching, and soil amendments. So this varies a lot according to the circumstances. You can have different strategies. So I'm just going to go through some things pretty quickly. So make a plan for how you're going to clear the weeds prior to installation. And the big two weeds in our area are Himalayan blackberry and English ivy. And they have to be dug out. You can't sheet mulch them. So before you install, you need to dig them out. And I like to have a little service path around the property border, and especially if there's a back fence, so you can get in and get those out because they'll just come right in from the adjoining lots and they will go right over the tops of the trees and shrubs. So you can sheet mulch with cardboard to get rid of weeds, layers of cardboard and turf. That's particularly good for turf. Or you can weed and water for a few cycles. So you water and then the weeds come up and you weed it and then you water again and make them come up again. Or you can do both. It really depends on the types of weeds that you're dealing with and how aggressive they are. And I like to add a top layer of wood mulch at least after the first installation. And it helps with weed control, about 3 inches of it. But some people don't like to use mulch anymore because they want to leave bare areas for bumblebees. So ground nesting native bees. So even if you put down the mulch, try and remember to leave some spaces that are completely bare. My favorite mulch is mini bark. I like it because it integrates well into the soil layer over time and adds to the soil, and also plants seed well in it. And part of my strategy, because it's really hard to get enough plant material, is to have the plants that I use seed around. So I want to encourage that. But if you're going to have a path made out of wood mulch, you don't want to use mini bark because you kick it around too much. So in that case, playground mix is what you want to go with. As far as water, if small plants need water for about 4 months. So if you plant in the fall, you don't have to worry about watering. That's one advantage. But the bigger plants, they depends on the plant, but you can need to water them for up to a year to get them established. And the old adage about watering is you want to water weekly, deeply. So deeply means to the depths of the roots and a little beyond. And then as time goes on, you increase that interval and you increase the depth of the watering until you stop altogether and you've driven those roots down to go find the soil, the water that's available. Soil, a lot of people think that if it's a native plant, you don't need to do anything to the soil. But if you're around a building site, it's been scraped down and compacted with heavy equipment. So I like to add a layer of planting mix. Planting mix is compost mixed with something to give it better drainage, like rice hulls. And that can be like 3 to 6 inches. And it will help the plants get started and they establish themselves faster. But it's not mandatory. If you don't feel like doing that because it doesn't seem right to you, you can do without it. So I can't think of any other way that I've changed as a gardener more than in my relationship with insects. And this respect, Doug Tallamy has been my main guru. How many people know about Doug Tallamy here? Yay! So if you don't know about him, he's listed in the handout. And if you want to know more, I've listed 2 of his books, the most recent and the most earliest one. And he's an entomologist who has researched the value of native plants as caterpillar habitat. And he started a movement to encourage people to replace lawns with native plants, and it's called the Homegrown National Park Movement. And Tallamy writes that anybody with a patch of earth can make a positive contribution to creating biodiversity by choosing native plants. And in a world where what's happening with our environment on so many levels can seem discouraging and out of our control, our native plant gardens can be places of hope and renewal. And if a garden is a dream made visual, the native plant movement represents a new dream. By making our homes a home for nature, we are nurturing new relationships, an intimate and lovely relationship with the many organisms that share our world. Thank you. So do you want to do questions? How do you handle that?
Well, we definitely want to do questions. I don't know how to handle it, but I think maybe I'll start with something for you to react. And then I'll go up there and play with the computer. Bring up the lights. Yeah, let's bring up the lights. So I was thinking about number 5 and maybe
Mhm.
gopher exclusion. I have gophers and I don't really love them. And I was wondering if you do.
I don't, but he's asking about gopher exclusion, what you would